Well, yeah, I wonder if I'll ever see her again. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want to lose hope, but yeah, I guess I guess I am losing hope that I'll ever see her again. But yeah, I pray for her all the time.
For an entire week, a group of electrical workers labored right inside the Wells family property. They installed poles, pulled cables, moved freely around the house. Every single day, they saw a little girl playing alone in the yard. And the day after they finished their work, Summer Wells was gone. No screams, no struggle, no trail. But a basement door was found unlatched. A neighbor heard a sharp scream. Then a car door slam. Then a vehicle pulling away. What changed that week? What was different in the days before she vanished? Only one thing. A crew had been near that house, on that land, for days. One of them had time, access, familiarity, and a window of just 2 minutes to act. This wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan. And someone who stood in that yard took her. This hypothesis is analyzed from the evidence, with the aim of bringing clarity to the case. For several days leading up to June 15, 2021, a group of electrical workers was present on the Wells property. They installed poles and ran cables inside the perimeter, walking daily across the yard. This wasn't work done on a nearby road or the edge of the woods. It was on the land, within view of the house, the basement, and the camper where Summer's grandmother stayed. One comment surfaced months later. They saw Summer playing alone every single day. I'm certain one of them took her. Though unverified, the statement aligns with what's already known. Summer was often outside, and the crew was there to witness it. These workers had direct, repeated access to the area where the child played. They were there long enough to understand the property's layout, the family's habits, and the gaps in supervision. The timing matters. The crew reportedly completed their work the day before Summer vanished. That alone places them at the final moment of opportunity. Not 2 weeks earlier. Not long after the fact. They were the last non-family individuals known to be consistently present, then gone, before the child disappeared. What makes this significant isn't speculation. It's structure. The Wells property isn't a typical suburban lot. It's isolated, shielded by trees, with few sightlines from the road. Someone unfamiliar with the terrain would have trouble reaching the house, let alone executing a clean abduction without leaving a trace. Yet whoever took Summer, if she was taken, did so in a manner that left no physical evidence and no noise. A planned abduction requires 3 things: access, time, and familiarity. This crew had all 3. Access was given through their work orders. Time was embedded in the length of the job, and familiarity developed naturally over repeated exposure to the house, yard, and routines. Witnesses later mentioned a red Toyota Tacoma seen near the area on June 14 or 15. TBI called the driver a possible witness, not a suspect. That person never came forward. Could they have been part of the crew? A returning worker? The vehicle description matches what many tradesmen use. No link was ever confirmed, but the absence of follow-up remains a void. Summer was last seen near the house around 6 p.m. Candace Bly, her mother, said she helped plant flowers with her grandmother, then went inside. The boys were watching TV. Summer, allegedly, went to the basement. Less than 2 minutes later, she was gone. Dogs didn't alert. No struggle was heard. No one noticed a vehicle. But a neighbor did report a scream, followed by a car door slam, and the sound of a vehicle pulling away. The sequence is suggestive. It implies a rapid, efficient exit, something only possible if the person already knew the route, the schedule, and the window of opportunity. In such scenarios, randomness is unlikely. An opportunistic predator doesn't drive into unfamiliar terrain without a plan, snatch a child in under 2 minutes, and leave without triggering dogs or leaving trace evidence. But someone who had been there, had observed the dogs, and knew their own scent was already familiar to them, might not provoke barking at all. That detail cannot be overlooked. The dogs didn't react. This suggests the absence of a perceived threat, or the presence of someone they'd already accepted. If we eliminate suspects with no access or visibility, few remain. No neighbors were close enough to see daily activity. No strangers were reported lurking nearby. The crew was the only outside group with sustained physical presence on the property in the critical week before the incident. Could one of them have acted alone? Absolutely. Abductions of this kind are not typically coordinated crimes. It only takes one man with intent, watching over several days, narrowing the target, identifying the soft spot in the schedule. Then, once the job is finished, returning at the exact moment when the family is distracted. The mother is inside, and the child is unguarded. 2 minutes is all that's needed if every variable has already been studied. The failure to thoroughly investigate this angle raises further concern. TBI has not publicly acknowledged whether the workers were identified, questioned, or cleared. No timeline cross referencing their presence with the disappearance was released. Their identities remain unknown to the public. In a case with more than 6,500 tips and intense scrutiny on the family, this silence is notable. This isn't a narrative meant to shift blame. It's a recognition of missed angles. A group of men were present, consistently, within the property boundaries. Summer was visible, alone, and habitual in her behavior. One day after their departure, she vanished without a trace. In any abduction, the safest time to act is immediately after a period of normalization. When presence has been established, suspicion is low, and access is expected. The departure of the crew marked a shift. The home was quiet again, no work vehicles, no tools. If one of them returned the next day, he would be noticed less than during the job, but more than a stranger ever could be. If he parked off the road and moved through familiar ground, he could reach the basement entrance without detection. The door, reportedly, was found open, the latch unlocked. In isolation, each of these facts might be explained, but together, they outline a trajectory, a presence, an opportunity, a disappearance. And that is what demands closer attention. Not because it is sensational, but because it is systematic. The question is simple: who else, outside of the Wells family, had time to plan, to learn the landscape, and to execute within such a narrow window? So far, only one answer fits. 2 minutes. That's what Candace Bly told investigators. She stepped away from Summer for only 2 minutes. Not half an hour. Not long enough to cook dinner or take a phone call. Just enough to turn her back. In that brief moment, her daughter vanished without a sound, without a footprint, without a trace. And if we believe the timeline she gave, then the entire nature of this case changes. Because 2 minutes is not an accident waiting to happen. It's a precision job. Let's reconstruct it the way she described. Summer was outside helping her grandmother plant flowers near the camper. Then she went inside the house. Candace told the boys to keep an eye on their sister. The boys were inside, watching television in the main room. Summer, as they say, went to the basement to play with her toys. Candace then walked away for what she claims was less than 2 minutes. When she returned and asked, "Where's Summer?" they pointed to the basement. She called out. No response. She went down. Nothing. Empty. Summer was gone. That's not a vague estimate of time. That's a specific bracket. And it means everything. Because in any missing person case, the size of the time window determines what's possible. A 5-minute gap allows for a lot. 10 minutes, even more. But 2 minutes is barely enough time to realize something's wrong. Which means that whatever happened to Summer had to begin and end within a space that offers no margin for error. It had to be fast, clean, and prepared in advance. Let's slow it down and think in seconds. The moment Summer enters the house, Candace is still nearby. She gives instructions to the boys and then steps away. Say that takes 10 to 15 seconds. From there, Summer walks toward the basement door. She opens it, descends the stairs, another 10 to 20 seconds. At this point, she's alone. The boys stay where they are. Candace is out of view. And now, the clock begins. If anyone was waiting outside that basement door, just on the other side, they could act now. That's assuming, of course, that the door was unlocked. And it was. Candace herself later confirmed the outside latch was open. The person would need only a few steps. Open the door. Reach in. Speak her name. Summer may not have screamed. She might have known the voice, recognized the face. This wasn't a stranger behind a tree. It could have been someone who had been around, someone she'd seen on the property before. In that case, she doesn't run, she doesn't fight, she just walks forward. 10 seconds, maybe 15. That's all it would take to remove a child from that basement doorway and vanish into the tree line. Meanwhile, Candace is still upstairs. Maybe she's outside. Maybe she's in another room. The boys are distracted by the TV. No one hears anything. No dogs bark. No doors slam. 30 seconds have passed. At most a minute. By the time Candace calls Summer's name and walks downstairs, the act is already complete. There is no one left to see. This kind of operation is not spontaneous. It's not something that happens by luck. To abduct a child in that amount of time, everything must already be known. The path, the access point, the blind spots in supervision, the layout of the home, the position of the door, the distance to the road, the timing of the adults, the behavior of the animals, and most importantly, the rhythm of the household. Someone would need to know all of that, and they'd need to know it before the 2 minutes began. That's why this moment is so critical. It rules out scenarios that rely on randomness. A stranger driving by wouldn't know about the basement door. They wouldn't know that today was the day the latch would be open. They wouldn't know when Candace would step away, or how long they had, or where to park, or how to leave without detection. It's too many variables for a person with no prior knowledge to control. But for someone who had already been there, someone who'd spent time on the property, days, even someone who'd seen the routines, the children, the access points, the pets, the trees, that person doesn't need to guess. That person is ready. The 2-minute window isn't just a clue. It's a boundary. It tells us the disappearance wasn't messy. It wasn't clumsy. There was no chase, no struggle. It was smooth, quiet, silent enough that no one noticed until it was too late. Let's be clear. Summer was not the kind of child to wander far. She wasn't wearing shoes. She wasn't carrying a backpack. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. And the terrain surrounding the house is steep, thick with brush and slope. She could not have run far in that time, and search teams covered the immediate area thoroughly within hours. If she had simply walked off, anything, would have been found. So what does that leave us with? A vanishing that occurred almost instantly. A child removed from sight without a sound. No one saw her leave. No one saw who took her. That suggests the action was already in motion the moment Candace stepped away. The opportunity was narrow, but it was enough if someone had prepared for it. There's no room here for improvisation. No margin for wandering or accidents. The person who acted did so with full knowledge of how little time they had and confidence in how little resistance they'd face. Think about how rare that is. In most abductions, the timeline is uncertain. Hours pass before the child is reported missing. Witnesses are unclear. The child might have gone several places before vanishing. But here, we know who last saw Summer, when they saw her, and when she was no longer there. The precision of that timing isn't just unusual, it's damning. It means the person responsible didn't make a move and hope for the best. They waited for the exact moment. They took the exact route. They left nothing behind. 2 minutes isn't long, but it's long enough for someone who already knew what they were doing. And that's what should terrify us most. There's a door at the back of the Wells home. Not the front. Not the side. It's low, tucked into the slope, half hidden in brush and shadow. It leads to the basement, and by most accounts, it's rarely used by anyone outside the family. Normally, that door stays latched. That's what Candace said herself in an interview. It locks from the inside with a pin-style safety latch, the kind that snaps into place with a metal click. But on the day Summer vanished, that latch was open. There was no sign of forced entry, no damage to the frame, no scuff marks on the doorknob, no broken latch, nothing to suggest someone pried their way in. The door simply wasn't secured. Which raises a question that sits at the heart of everything. Who knew that? Because in a house with 4 children, An unlocked door to the outside isn't just an oversight, it's an opening. An opportunity. But only if someone was prepared to use it. This wasn't a sliding glass door or an entry off a deck. It's a door low to the ground, surrounded by slope and vegetation. The kind of door you don't notice unless you're standing right in front of it. The kind of door you don't approach unless you already know it's there. Now consider where it leads. Directly behind that door is a clearing. A service access path runs through it, roughly 20 to 30 feet wide, sloping away from the house and toward the tree line. Weeks earlier, a crew had been working there, digging, installing poles, running electrical lines. For days, they stood right in that spot, right outside that door. They knew the elevation, the angles, the distance to the road. They knew where the tree cover thickened, where vehicles could pull off without being seen. They knew, because they'd been there. If the latch was unlocked, it's unlikely Summer opened it herself. She was 5. The latch is mounted high on the inside of the door, and even if she could reach it, why would she leave? She had just gone to play. She didn't have shoes on. She didn't take a toy. She didn't tell her brothers. And she didn't wander far. Search teams scoured the immediate woods within hours. Nothing. So the most logical possibility is that someone came in. Through that door, quietly, intentionally, and that only works if they already knew how to get there. That's where local geography becomes critical. From the main driveway, you can't see the basement door. From the road, you'd never know it existed. To reach it, you have to walk around the house, across uneven terrain, and into a space behind the structure, partially shielded by trees. You don't find it unless you're familiar. It's not just a location. It's a route. A person who knew that door was sometimes unlocked, who had seen the family's rhythms, who understood how to move through the back terrain without drawing attention, that person could approach without risk. They wouldn't need to force anything. They wouldn't need to open windows or disable alarms. They'd already tested the distance, already timed the walk, already visualized the retreat. That's not just access. That's control. No one saw anyone on the property that day. No one heard shouting. The dogs didn't react. The boys saw nothing. And yet, Summer was gone. That makes sense only if someone managed the approach with precision. Not luck, not panic. Calculated movement. A step-by-step plan through familiar land, with a known door, in a known direction. And the absence of physical evidence reinforces that. There were no footprints, no handprints, no partial fingerprints on the door. Whoever entered left nothing, which again points to experience. Someone who knew not to touch metal, who didn't panic, rush, or fumble. They were in and out before anyone even thought to look. People often ask why there wasn't a scream. Why no struggle? But that assumes the child felt threatened. What if she didn't? What if the person at the door was someone she'd seen before? A familiar face, someone who had waved, smiled, maybe even spoken to her from across the fence line. If so, her reaction wouldn't be fear. It would be curiosity. Trust. She wouldn't run, she'd follow, or walk right into a waiting arm. And that makes it even more disturbing, because now we're no longer looking for a masked figure in the woods. We're looking for someone who blended in, who appeared ordinary, who had reason to be there before. The door matters because it's the only part of the house that provides discreet outside access without visibility from the main rooms. From the living room, you can't see it. From the kitchen, you can't hear it. Even from the camper, the line of sight is limited. That means someone could open that door, stand there for several seconds, and never be detected. They didn't need to kick it. They didn't need to break a lock. They only needed it to be unlatched, and it was. And that's the point. Everything about this sequence suggests planning. The phrase, "no evidence of forced entry," is often taken as reassurance. But in this case, it should be the opposite. It means someone didn't need to force anything, because they already knew what would be open. That door is more than just an exit. It's the smoking gun of silence. And the space outside it, the one cleared days earlier by utility crews, may not just have been a work zone. It may have been the path, the staging area, the quiet, familiar trail that someone used to walk away, unnoticed, carrying a child. If that's what happened, then this wasn't a lucky guess or a split-second opportunity. It was a route planned in advance. And it started at a door no one thought to lock. It was just before evening when a neighbor heard it, something sharp, sudden, and off-pattern. A high-pitched scream, she said. Not playful. Not routine. Not like the sounds that usually floated through those hills. Just one isolated burst, then silence. Moments later, another sound, the unmistakable thud of a car door slamming shut. And shortly after that, a vehicle engine. Not revving in panic. Just pulling away. She didn't call police right then. It didn't seem urgent. But she remembered it later. When the news came out. When the flyers appeared. When Summer's face was suddenly everywhere. That scream. That door. That engine. All within a minute. All within the time frame when Summer vanished. It was the only audible clue that something might have happened. Law enforcement never publicly confirmed the origin of the sounds. The sheriff said they had no verified report linking them directly to the disappearance. TBI didn't clarify whether the neighbor's account matched the timeline Candace gave. But the fact remains, a scream was heard, followed by a vehicle departure. And they both happened right around the time Summer was last seen. If this were an isolated detail, maybe it could be dismissed. Strange sounds echo in wooded hollows. Kids scream, doors slam, engines hum. But this wasn't just a random noise on a random day. It was a sequence, and its parts line up with what came next. The search began. Authorities brought in dogs trained to track scent. They started at the house, followed the trail down into the woods, through the brush, across uneven ground. The dogs followed it carefully, noses to the dirt, handlers tight on the leash. The scent was strong, until it wasn't. Until it ended at the road. Not just any part of the road, but the same stretch where the scream had been heard, where a car was said to have pulled away. That's where the dogs lost the trail. That's where it stopped, abruptly, like someone had hit, cut, on a film reel. No residual scent beyond the edge. No sign that Summer had continued walking on foot. No indication she crossed to the other side. Just gone. As if scooped up and carried off. This is the point where physical evidence intersects with acoustic witness. The scream. The door. The vehicle. The broken scent. One that begins in the woods and ends at the edge of the road. And here's the problem. A 5-year-old child doesn't walk through wooded terrain, barefoot, without leaving any sign. Not in the Tennessee heat. Not across gravel and brush. She would have been scratched. Muddy. Slowed down. She might have called for help. She might have turned back. And above all, she would have left a trail. But she didn't. Because she didn't walk to that road. She was brought there. That's the only explanation that aligns with the facts. The dogs were confident up to that point. Then the trail ended not in confusion, but in interruption, as if the source of the scent had been physically removed from the ground. This is what handlers call a hard stop. It doesn't mean the trail goes cold gradually. It doesn't mean it fades due to environmental conditions. It means the object of the search is no longer in contact with the earth. Someone put her into a vehicle. That matches the timing of the scream, the slam, and the departure. And it leads to one chilling possibility. Summer may have tried to resist. The scream wasn't just a startled sound. It may have been the only noise she made before being forced into the car. And the door slam. Not someone arriving. Someone leaving. A fast exit. Efficient. No second attempt. It also suggests something else. The person didn't walk her to the road. They brought her there quickly, quietly, and they had a getaway path already mapped. This wasn't someone panicking or improvising. This was someone who knew exactly where to park, how far to walk, and when to leave. The search teams found nothing beyond that point. No hair, no fibers, no dropped clothing, no tire tracks distinct enough to trace. The terrain gave no clues. The vehicle, whatever it was, left no trail behind. Which again suggests a clean exit. Why is that important? This wasn't reckless. It wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate. Whoever did this moved fast, made no noise, left nothing behind. They didn't wander. They didn't hesitate. They knew where they were going and how long they had. In less than 2 minutes, the act was done. No struggle, no confusion. Just 3 sounds. A scream, a door, a car pulling away, and then silence. Police never confirmed a suspect tied to that vehicle. No camera footage, no license plate, just a witness memory and a scent trail that ended cold at the road. That's what remains. No footprints, no dropped toy, just the sound of departure and the absence of a child. The road isn't where the trail ends, it's where it begins. The Wells property wasn't guarded by gates or cameras, it was guarded by dogs. Multiple, large, vocal dogs that were known to bark at anything unfamiliar. That's not speculation, it's been confirmed in interviews and neighbor reports. These weren't silent house pets. They were territorial animals accustomed to reacting. And yet, on the day Summer Wells disappeared, no one heard a single bark. Not during the time she vanished, not before, not after. No growls, no alarm, nothing. That absence is more than strange, it's statistically abnormal. In rural cases where a child disappears near dogs, those dogs typically provide the first signal that something's wrong. They bark at strangers. They growl at odd movements. They alert the household. In this case, they did none of that. Which raises a simple question: why? The most consistent explanation is that the person who approached wasn't a stranger to the dogs. They didn't provoke fear or curiosity because they were already familiar. And the only way to achieve that kind of tolerance is repetition. The dogs must have seen, smelled, and sensed this person enough times to normalize their presence. That doesn't happen in a single day. It happens over multiple days. And who, in the days leading up to Summer's disappearance, was on that property long enough and often enough for the dogs to get used to them? Only 2 groups: the family and the utility workers who had been installing electrical equipment on site. The family was inside the house or nearby when Summer vanished, and their presence was accounted for. That leaves one possibility worth real scrutiny. A member of the work crew. For several days, these workers operated all around the Wells home. They walked across the yard, they unloaded gear. They passed near the camper and the basement entrance. They were close enough that the dogs didn't just see them once, they saw them repeatedly. They smelled them, heard their voices, observed their movements. In the animal's perception, these people became part of the landscape. So, if one of them returned, alone, at a later time, even unannounced, the dogs might not have barked. The dogs would not perceive an immediate threat because the scent was already logged in memory. They wouldn't necessarily go greet the person, but they also wouldn't sound the alarm. This point narrows the suspect profile significantly. It eliminates unknown strangers, one-time intruders, or spontaneous criminals. Because anyone new, anyone unfamiliar, would have triggered a vocal response. The absence of barking tells us the dogs did not perceive danger. And that tells us the person had already been there. The silence of the dogs is not an afterthought, a behavioral marker. In a rural missing person case, dogs are often the first detectors of threat. When they don't respond, it's either because the threat is invisible, or because it has been seen too many times to register as abnormal. Let's be clear, the dogs were not locked up. They weren't away. They were present, and they had barked at others before. That means their non-reaction wasn't due to circumstance, it was due to familiarity. And that familiarity is critical, because it cannot be faked. A person who wants to avoid a dog's alarm would either have to drug them, distract them, or be known to them. There's no evidence of sedatives, no sign of food left out, no reports of barking fading into silence. There was no reaction to begin with. That rules out all theories involving violent strangers, opportunistic trespassers, or someone entering the scene for the first time. This points toward a specific behavioral pattern: someone who had walked the grounds, had left scent, had created a presence days before. In short, someone who had blended into the background. That doesn't happen by accident. It takes time. It takes physical proximity. And most of all, it takes multiple exposures, which again brings the focus back to the workers. Not the whole crew, not everyone, just one individual with time access and now critically no resistance from the dogs. The dog's silence isn't just a missing detail. It's an active indicator that whoever came near the house that day didn't feel like a threat to them. That only happens when someone's presence has already been normalized. Which makes it clear, the person who took Summer didn't just know the terrain or the schedule. They knew the animals, or at least, the animals knew them. From the moment Summer Wells was reported missing, theories have circulated: accident, wandering off, family involvement. But when each of those is examined against hard facts, they start to collapse. First, the accident theory. If Summer had fallen, tripped, or suffered a fatal injury near the house, there would have been some trace. Blood, torn clothing, a broken sandal, a footprint in the dirt, but none of that was found. Not in the yard, not in the basement, not in the woods. Multiple search teams scoured the area within hours, equipped with thermal imaging, dogs, drones, and boots on the ground. They found nothing: no disturbed brush, no drag marks, no scent trail continuing past the road. If there had been a fatal accident on the property, it would have left something behind. Instead, the scene was clean. Too clean for an accident. Then the wandering theory. Summer wasn't wearing shoes. The terrain surrounding the house is difficult: steep slopes, thick undergrowth, rocky patches, uneven trails. Even an adult would struggle to move quickly or quietly through it barefoot. A 5-year-old, without protection for her feet, would have slowed down almost immediately. She would have left a trail of discomfort: tears, scratches, broken skin. She would have called out. If she wandered off and kept walking, there would be signs: blood on leaves, pieces of clothing caught on twigs, disturbed vegetation. None of that was found. The dogs tracked her scent only to the road. Beyond that, nothing. It ended, cold and clean, not because she got lost, but because she wasn't walking anymore. And then there's the question of the family. If something had happened inside the home, if one of them had caused harm and tried to hide it, how much time would they have had? According to records, Candace called 911 at approximately 6:30 p.m. That was within minutes of discovering Summer wasn't in the basement. Don Wells, the father, was confirmed to be at work over 40 minutes away. That leaves Candace and the 3 boys at the house. If a cover-up was attempted, it would have had to occur in that tiny window between realization and the arrival of law enforcement, no more than 10 to 15 minutes. In that time, someone would have had to move a body, clean up all trace evidence, coordinate a narrative with the children, and reset the scene to look untouched. That doesn't just stretch plausibility, it breaks it, especially when you consider that no one in that house had any background in law enforcement, medical training, or crime scene manipulation. There was no staging, no fake window break, no planted clues, just a child who was suddenly gone. And that's exactly the point. If this were an inside job, if someone in the house had something to hide, why wouldn't they build a story? Why wouldn't they try to steer the narrative? Stage a break-in, leave misleading footprints, create a delay before calling police. None of that happened. The call to 911 was placed quickly, too quickly for anyone to have constructed an alternate reality. The boys were consistent in saying Summer went downstairs. Candace didn't try to create a distraction. She panicked and called for help. This is not the behavior of someone who's hiding something. It's the behavior of someone who lost control of the situation. If guilt were present in the house, it didn't have time to operate. That window was too narrow. And nothing about the scene indicated cover-up. There was no bleach smell, no rearranged furniture, no signs of cleanup. Investigators found a house in disarray, yes, but not one that had been staged. Which brings the focus back to the simplest possibility. Someone outside the home, someone who had been watching, moved at the right moment. They didn't need to clean anything because they didn't leave a mess. They didn't need to manipulate witnesses because the witnesses didn't see them. They didn't need to fabricate a timeline because the timeline already worked in their favor. In cases of child abduction, the most successful ones, meaning the ones where the child disappears without a trace, are carried out not by desperate amateurs, but by opportunists who prepare quietly and strike surgically. That's what happened here. Whoever took Summer didn't stumble into the moment. They waited for it. They moved fast, took nothing they didn't need, and left no trace. If it had been a family member, the response would have been messier. Someone would have hesitated. Someone would have cried or cracked under pressure. But in this case, the family gave law enforcement access immediately. They didn't refuse searches. They didn't demand lawyers. They didn't disappear. Dawn Wells gave interviews. Candace, though inconsistent at times, didn't hide. That level of openness is rarely found in guilt. The theory that someone inside the home harmed Summer and disposed of her body without any physical or behavioral trace doesn't align with the facts. There was no time, no method, and no evidence. That kind of vanishing, executed with no detection, is nearly impossible for untrained individuals under pressure. But for someone on the outside, someone who had studied the house, the timing, the terrain, the dogs, it's possible. And not just possible, but efficient. Everything about the disappearance points to speed and silence. That's not how accidents happen. That's not how children get lost. That's how professionals operate. So when we look at what didn't happen, no blood, no panic, no delay, no footprints, no sound, we're left with one conclusion. This wasn't a stumble or a slip. It wasn't a tragic mistake inside the house. It was a clean removal. A planned act carried out at the precise moment, when the child was most vulnerable. And it was done by someone who didn't need to create a story, because the story was already unfolding exactly how they wanted it to. Summer didn't fall. She didn't wander. And her family didn't have time to build a lie. Someone took her. And they did it so well, no one saw them coming. There is a reason this theory exists. It wasn't born from speculation or paranoia, it came from the gaps. The silence. The clean disappearance. It's the only explanation that holds under pressure, the only one that accounts for what was missing. No trace, no noise, no delay. A child gone in under 2 minutes. No screaming, no struggle, no dog barking. No witness saw a stranger arrive. No one reported a break-in. But someone had been near the house every day that week. Close. Regular. Familiar. Not family, not a neighbor, not a friend, but present. That kind of presence doesn't draw suspicion. It fades into the background. And that is precisely why this theory survives, because it explains the impossible without needing anything more than what was already there. The person didn't need to be trusted. They didn't need Summer to know their name. They didn't even need to speak to her. All they needed was to be seen enough times to become normal. Their face, their voice, their smell, no longer foreign. So what kind of person does this? What motive leads to this kind of act? Not an argument, not revenge, not money, not directly. Most likely, it's one of 3 profiles. First, the predator, a person who watches children, who notices their patterns, who fixates on one. This isn't about opportunity alone, it's about obsession. Predators don't just act. They wait, they blend, they plan, and when the moment arrives, they strike with speed and silence. For a person like that, being assigned to a work site near a vulnerable child is not just access, it's temptation. And if no one is watching them, if no one thinks twice, it becomes a hunting ground. Second, the opportunist. Someone who didn't arrive with a plan, but saw one form. Day by day, watching the house, the rhythm, the way the adults got distracted, the way the child played outside alone, the way the dogs stopped barking. A person who notices the crack and decides to slip through it. They may not have had a record. They may not have done it before. But the conditions were too perfect. No shoes on the girl. No one watching. The house exposed. The terrain dry. The road nearby. And if that person had a vehicle, an escape route, they didn't need much else. They just needed one moment. That moment came, and they took it. Third, the trafficker. A person who isn't acting alone. Who doesn't plan to keep the child, but to move her, to sell, to deliver, to disappear with her and pass her along. This isn't the most likely scenario, but it's one that law enforcement never fully rules out. Because when a child vanishes without trace, without remains, and without anyone speaking up, this possibility remains. Especially when the timing is surgical. When the act is so fast, so clean, that it doesn't resemble a personal act. It resembles a job. In all three cases, the motive is dark. But what makes this theory chilling isn't just the why, it's the how. Because the opportunity wasn't just created. It was inherited. Someone didn't break in. They didn't scale a fence. They didn't fake an emergency. They were already there. Their access was sanctioned. Their presence was normal. And that gave them everything they needed: time, routine, observation, exit. They didn't need to make the scene fit their plan. The scene already fit. All they had to do was choose the right moment. And that moment came with bonus advantages. Summer wasn't wearing shoes, meaning she wouldn't run far, wouldn't fight much, wouldn't survive long outside alone. She was 5, small, light, easy to carry. No need to force, no need to drag. If she was coaxed, she may have followed. If she was lifted, she wouldn't have screamed right away. The back of a truck, a covered van, even a car with tinted windows. No struggle, no noise. Gun in seconds. The dogs didn't react. Because the person didn't smell wrong. Didn't move in a way that triggered alarm. The boys didn't notice. Because the person never went upstairs. Never made a sound that would stand out. The mother didn't see. Because she was inside for less than 5 minutes. And by the time she returned, the child was no longer anywhere. It was, logistically, the perfect crime. Not because it was genius, but because it was simple. That's what gives this theory weight. That's why people keep returning to it, not because they want it to be true, but because it fits. The profile fits, the timing fits, the behavior fits, and most importantly, the silence fits. Silence from the child, silence from the dogs, silence from the land. If the abduction was truly external, and everything points to that, then the perpetrator had to be someone invisible. And once they were gone, no one questioned it. No one noticed them missing. No one asked, "Where is he today?" Because no one knew to care. That's the advantage of being temporary, of being assigned, of being part of a rotating crew. You show up, you work, you leave. You don't stay long enough to raise questions, and if you return, just once, at the right time, for the wrong reason, you look like everyone else. That is why this theory exists. Because every other theory requires something not found. A body, a mistake, a confession. This theory only requires what was already there. A face, a routine, a vehicle, and a choice made in silence, at the perfect time. Every theory, no matter how compelling, must withstand scrutiny. The idea that someone from the crew of workers was responsible for Summer Wells' disappearance provides a logical explanation for many of the known facts. But logic is not proof. And as with any hypothesis, the strength of the argument lies not just in what it explains, but in how it holds up under what it cannot explain. There are questions, legitimate ones, that still have no clear answer. And ignoring them would be as irresponsible as assuming guilt without evidence. The first and most obvious question: why did no one see anything? Even in a rural area, with few neighbors and long driveways, a vehicle arriving or leaving the scene at the critical moment should, in theory, have attracted some attention. If someone drove a car or truck onto Ben Hill Road to abduct a child, how did no one notice the movement? How did a vehicle appear and vanish in such a narrow window of time without drawing a single report of unusual traffic? Some defenders of the theory point to the terrain, wooded, quiet, with limited lines of sight. They suggest the kidnapper parked out of view or used a path less traveled. But these remain speculations. No one has come forward saying they saw a strange vehicle parked nearby. No doorbell cameras exist in that area. No traffic cam footage was available. If a car was used, it came and went like a shadow. But that's also a gap in the theory. Without a known vehicle, the mechanics of the abduction remain blurry. An unseen car raises as many doubts as it answers. Then comes the issue of the crew's work schedule. The theory relies heavily on the assumption that at least one member of the crew had access to the house in the days leading up to the disappearance, and possibly on the day itself. But do we know that for certain? Were they still active in the area that exact afternoon? Was anyone officially logged in, or was it their day off? The timeline is fuzzy, and no official report has detailed which worker, if any, was still near the Wells home on June 15th. Without verified presence, opportunity becomes a guess, not a fact. Another complication is the total absence of physical evidence. If someone took Summer, whether by coaxing or force, there should have been some trace. A footprint, a fiber, a hair, a tire mark. But nothing definitive has been found. No object has linked a suspect to the scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, no item left behind. That doesn't mean the act didn't happen, but it does weaken the ability to narrow the focus to one individual. Without evidence, the theory lives in the realm of possibility, not probability. It's also important to note that law enforcement has never released a profile or description matching any member of the work crew. No sketch. No suspicious behavior report. No witness testimony identifying someone loitering or acting strangely. If a person from that crew had returned to the property off hours to commit a crime, they did so without drawing a single glance, a single whisper. That's difficult to accept without any documented slip-up. People who commit crimes often miscalculate. They get seen. They say the wrong thing. They leave behind something. Here, we have none of that. And what about Summer herself? Even if the abductor was familiar to her, seen but not close, why didn't she resist? Why didn't she scream? It's possible she was tricked, lured with a promise, or simply caught off guard. But a child being taken from her own home, through a door, across a yard, and into a vehicle, without a single sound, is rare. It's not impossible, but it is uncommon. The lack of resistance implies either total surprise or total trust. And if it was surprise, it suggests the act was fast, aggressive, and practiced. If it was trust, it implies prior contact or grooming, none of which has been confirmed. That leads to another missing element, motive. While several types of offenders could fit this situation, predators, opportunists, traffickers, there has been no known history or pattern linked to any worker involved. No previous complaints. No red flags. No criminal records that have been released publicly. If one of them had such a background, it's never been disclosed. That doesn't rule out guilt, but it does make it harder to build a suspect profile from silence. There is also the troubling reality that the theory, while neat, is hard to test. The crew was temporary. Their work finished right before the disappearance. Many of them likely moved on to other sites, towns, or even states. The trail went cold not just because the act was clean, but because the people involved were mobile. That mobility adds to the theory's plausibility, but also to its uncertainty. It's difficult to investigate people who are already gone. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a theory that feels right, but can't yet be proven. A theory that lines up with the facts, but also depends on assumptions we cannot verify. A theory that fills in the gaps, but also leaves a few open. That's not a flaw. That's honesty. And honesty is what these cases need most. Because when you chase a single path too far without testing it, you risk building a story that comforts more than it clarifies. The theory of a worker-turned-abductor explains many things, but not all things. Until someone speaks up or new evidence emerges, we must hold the idea with both hands, firmly, but not blindly. Because while it may be the most logical theory we have, it's still a theory. In any missing child case, the first hours are chaos. Emotions run high, suspicions rise fast, and narratives form quicker than facts can catch up. That's why the direction of an investigation is often determined not just by evidence, but by perception. Who appears guilty? Who has a record? Who fits the image of someone capable of harm? And in the case of Summer Wells, the public's eyes, and soon the investigators, locked onto the family within hours. Once that happened, It became extremely difficult for any other theory to take root, no matter how reasonable it might have been. The Wells family was not a picture-perfect household. Don Wells had a criminal history. Candace Bly had a history of banned substance use. The home was cluttered, chaotic. There were reports of neglect, of instability, of arguments and strange behavior. In the eyes of the media, this was fuel. The kind of background that makes people lean forward and say, "I knew it." It wasn't proof, but it was enough to fill headlines, stir speculation, and drown out alternate explanations before they could speak. Television segments didn't ask who else had been on the property. They asked why Candace didn't cry during interviews. They didn't analyze the layout of the yard. They analyzed the tone of Don's voice. The coverage became circular. The more the family was scrutinized, the more they looked suspicious under the microscope. This shifted the public's attention entirely onto them, an echo chamber of doubt, where every twitch became a sign of guilt, and every silence was treated as a scream. But the danger of this kind of tunnel vision is that it doesn't just affect public opinion. It influences how resources are used. From the earliest days, law enforcement leaned heavily into the family as the focus of the case. It's not hard to understand why. Statistically, most children who go missing are harmed by someone close to them. The parents are often investigated first, and in many cases, that leads to answers. But this case wasn't like most. What makes this particularly troubling is the near complete absence of transparency regarding another group, the electrical workers. These individuals were on the property for days, moving freely around the yard, close to the basement entrance, and near the path leading to the main road. They were there long enough to learn routines, long enough to observe vulnerabilities. But what has been released to the public about their movements? Virtually nothing. There has been no confirmed list of names, no published work schedules, no confirmation that their alibis were cross-checked, no GPS data from their vehicles, no camera footage, if any exists, was mentioned involving them. It's not that the theory was investigated and ruled out. It's that it was never brought into the light. That's the most baffling part. How could an entire group of people who had physical access to the area during the exact time frame in question remain outside the central narrative of the investigation? One possible explanation lies in human psychology. Once a suspect makes sense to an investigator, whether consciously or unconsciously, it's hard to unsee that. Every behavior becomes evidence, and every inconsistency becomes a clue. And in contrast, when a group of workers shows up, does their job, and leaves, they seem ordinary. They don't fit the profile we expect of a child abductor. They don't look the part. They don't act suspicious. So they're overlooked, not because there's proof of innocence, but because there's no emotional trigger that makes us look twice. There's also the issue of institutional priority. Law enforcement agencies are stretched thin. When thousands of tips pour in, they have to make choices. Who to follow up with, who to clear, who to pursue. And public pressure influences those choices. When a theory gains traction online or in the media, it creates noise. That noise leads to political heat, media inquiries, and internal justification for devoting resources in that direction. The family made headlines. The workers didn't. So one theory got all the attention, and the other disappeared behind the curtain. But that curtain might be hiding the truth. It's one thing to investigate a theory and find it lacking. It's another to not investigate it at all, or to do so behind closed doors, with no transparency and no opportunity for public accountability. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has never released a formal statement about the scope of their inquiry into the work crew. There are no details about interviews conducted, timesheets verified, or vehicle movements tracked. Without that, we are left to guess. Was it looked at and dismissed? Or was it never looked at seriously to begin with? And this leads to a painful question. If this theory is even partially true, if the person responsible was overlooked, dismissed, or never pursued, what does that say about how we search for the missing? What does it say about what we prioritize? If optics and headlines carry more weight than timelines and access, we risk doing what feels right instead of what is right. In a case where the smallest detail could break the silence, failing to examine the obvious becomes the loudest mistake. And that's what this might be, not a lack of evidence, but a lack of will to look in the direction no one wanted to believe. Because it's easier to suspect the messy family than to confront the idea that someone walked onto that property in broad daylight, right under everyone's noses, and walked away with a child, and no one asked their name. Some stories aren't just about what happened. They're about what was missed. The case of Summer Wells is more than a disappearance. It is a warning, a quiet alarm bell for every community, every neighborhood, every family that thinks danger always wears a mask, because sometimes it doesn't. Carries a clipboard, parks a work truck at the edge of a yard, smiles, waves, walks away, and never gets questioned. Summer was 5. She was small, light, full of energy. She lived in a rural corner of Tennessee, one of those places where people wave to each other from porches, where strangers are noticed, where children play barefoot in the yard. But the very things that made her world peaceful are what made it vulnerable. A quiet house, a familiar routine, an assumption of safety. And then, she was gone. What if the person who took her wasn't a masked intruder, but someone who had been there all along, seen but unseen, normal by design? That is what this case forces us to confront, not just the possibility of evil, but the comfort we give it when it blends in. Too often, we think that danger comes from the outside, from people who look wrong, act wrong, sound wrong. But the truth is harder. The truth is that people who do harm often know how to seem harmless. They practice invisibility. They don't stand out. They slide in alongside the ordinary and wait until no one is looking. In the days before Summer vanished, someone may have been watching. Not from the woods, but from a work site, from a hill, from a truck window. And when they acted, they didn't need force. They didn't need noise. They needed timing. Familiarity, silence. That's all. This is why we must learn to pay attention, not just to what shocks us, but to what blends in. Not just to what we feel, but to what we see. The truth is, we were all trained to focus on the wrong thing. When the family appeared unstable, we watched them more closely. When someone acted odd on camera, we judged them. When a parent didn't cry, we assumed they were guilty. And in doing so, we may have missed something bigger. Something quieter. This is a failure not of evidence, but of awareness. We didn't ask who else had been there. We didn't ask who had access. We didn't ask who could leave without question. Instead, we asked whether the mother's interview looked sincere, whether the father's past made him a villain, whether the home looked like a place where tragedy could grow. We focused on the things that made us feel like we understood. But feeling isn't knowing. That's the lesson here, to separate emotion from evidence, to look beyond stereotypes, to question what feels normal, because sometimes normal is camouflage. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who know how to stay just outside suspicion. And when we forget that, we hand them the advantage. But it's not too late. Not for justice. Not for truth. Someone knows what happened. Maybe they saw something odd that week, a vehicle parked where it shouldn't be, a man lingering too long by the tree line, a face that seemed familiar but didn't belong. Maybe they overheard something at work, or heard a story that didn't sit right, or knew someone who left town right after that day. Maybe they kept quiet because they weren't sure, or because they didn't think it mattered. But it does matter. Because one detail, one tip, can change everything. A single sentence can point the spotlight in a new direction. A name, a license plate, a timeline, a shift in routine. It doesn't take a confession. It just takes a clue, a moment of courage, a voice that says, I saw something, I remember, I can't be silent anymore. If that person is you, or someone you know, it's time. You don't have to be certain. You don't have to solve the case. You just have to speak. Because silence helps no one, except the one who got away. It could be anonymous. It could be small. but it could be everything. This case is not just about a child who went missing. It's about a moment where everyone looked one way, and maybe the truth stood quietly in the other direction. It's about how we react to uncertainty, how we let bias shape what we see, and how easily someone can vanish, not because they were invisible, but because we weren't looking in the right place. So let this be more than a story. Let it be a reason to look closer. Let it be the moment we learn that trust must be earned, not assumed. That presence is not innocence. And that being seen often does not mean being known. Summer Wells didn't vanish. She was taken. And the person who did it may have been among us, not hiding in darkness, but walking through daylight, unnoticed, because no one thought to question them. That's not just haunting. That's preventable. But only if we choose to see, only if we refuse to be silent.